The other day I noticed I had 90s pop hit Ibiza by Venga Boys going round and round in my head. Back to the island, ooh, if you know it, you know it. And when I noticed that these lyrics were going round and round in my head, I was thinking, what? Why this song? I think I was 15 when this song was released. And it wasn't exactly a favourite. But then when I thought about it, I realised that 10 minutes ago I had come out of a client session and my client had been on holiday in Ibiza. So that mention of Ibiza triggered something off in my brain. My brain, which like yours, has 86 billion neurons and 100 trillion connections. And in there, in that mass of neurons and trillions of connections is the lyrics to Venga Boys' Ibiza. And I share this to highlight how much content we have in our wiring of our brain where they're kind of like conditioned responses. There's a trigger and then there's a reaction. The trigger was I heard the word Ibiza. The reaction was I couldn't get that song out of my head for the next hour. And since planning this YouTube video and planning to talk about it, it's back. But back to binge eating. If we think about binge eating as a conditioned pattern, there are a whole cluster of neurons and networks that are dedicated to how you think about food, feel about food, and behave around food. And if you feel like you are on Groundhog Day, you're going around the same thing over and over again, chances are you have these neural networks that are quite strongly wired, which means they're just very active. And so if we have a conditioned problem, there's two potential solutions. The first one is to maintain a state of awareness and presence. So we watch ourselves think, we're looking out for it, we're super aware. We're able to occupy that higher level of consciousness, which I don't mean that in a woo way, just the capacity to be able to watch ourselves think and intervene. Now, when I have clients who say, yeah, this is great, this works, but does this mean I'm supposed to maintain this perfect place of presence throughout my life? That doesn't feel possible. It actually feels like hard work. And no, that's not what I'm saying, because I go unconscious. There are times when I want to switch off, even though I'm still awake and doing things, and I go into autopilot. I think it's very human. So this brings me on to the second solution to a conditioned problem, and that is rewiring. We want to create some new wiring that the more that becomes conditioned, the more available it is. So even the thoughts that I now have around food and my eating are so different to what they were years ago. And I'm not doing that. That is automatic. That is now part of my conditioning. And so when something becomes conditioned, it takes less effort. So the question becomes, how do we make the old conditioning less active and make the new conditioning stronger? Well, there's three things that I want to talk about today, and these things are blocks to this process, but they're also aids, things that you can use to help the process of rewiring in networks that look more like a recovered mind. So this is about how to go from binge mind to recovered mind. And the first piece that I want to touch on is beliefs. Now, I want to separate beliefs from thoughts because they're not the same thing. I will still get the occasional thought that goes, why don't you just go and binge? A couple of months ago even, I was really overwhelmed with a few things and my brain went, you could just binge. Now, I didn't have to choose my reaction to that thought like I did in the process of recovery. In the process of recovery, it would be noticing that thought and in that in that state of higher awareness and going, how do I want to respond to this thought? But now, because that has become integrated into the wiring of my brain just goes, no, we don't do that anymore. And there's no battle. So it can feel like recovery is going to be one long battle because in the process of it, it feels like it's hard work. But this stuff can start to become automatic if you take these things into consideration. So firstly, how might your beliefs be working against you? I think the most important question anybody who wants to stop binge eating needs to ask themselves is, what does recovery actually look like? Because for some people, especially if they're stuck in the binge restrict cycle, they think recovery looks like the restrict part of the cycle, not realizing that that image of recovery looking like that is actually part of the conditioned problem. Or even if you're not a binge restrictor, your idea of recovery might be some perfect way of being with food. Or you might think that recovery means you never have to think about food. Try finishing this sentence. I will believe I'm recovered when, and notice what came up. And in fact, share with me in the chat below what came up. What is this belief that you have that needs to happen, how things need to look in order for you to be recovered? Because if there are beliefs that are either not realistic, maybe you have this belief that your body should be a certain way and your biology is going to keep pushing back against that because you're trying to eat less than your body wants. Or maybe there's a whole load of confusion about not knowing what recovery looks like. In which case, this is where my channel comes in. This is where other people who are out there talking about recovery from all kinds of eating challenges, you can listen to them, and then, here's the important piece, you then think about it for yourself. I know it's very compelling to binge watch 2 hours of content and just be like, if I just get enough information, maybe that will change my behavior. But without taking time to reflect, to think, because while you are thinking about new information, you are thinking new thoughts. And when you are thinking new thoughts, you are creating new wiring. Any new wiring that is created just through listening or reading content is going to be very fragile until you start thinking about it. Now you might think, well, I think about this problem all the time. But if you're thinking about this problem all the time, chances are you're thinking about it from the conditioned state. So you're just thinking the same thoughts over and over again about this problem. We need some new thoughts. And again, to separate thoughts from beliefs, which leads me on to attention. Being able to direct your attention, choose where to put your attention, practice putting your attention where you want it to be, is crucial. Rewiring is a learning process. And in order to learn, we have to pay attention. We can't learn a new language. We can't learn to play an instrument. We can't learn any of these things without attention and practice. So when you have old conditioned thinking patterns that come up, like when that Venga Boys song came in my head, it's like, I'm not thinking those thoughts are happening to me. So as Byron Katie says, we spend a lot of our time not thinking, but being thought. We identify with our thoughts being us, and we think that, well, because we're thinking it, this is us thinking it and this is true, as opposed to this is just old stuff coming up again and again. So unless there is a deliberate effort, attention and intention to start practicing new ways of thinking, the old thinking is always going to win. If you don't learn to direct your attention, your conditioned patterns will rule your life. And you'll be pulled from one compulsive thing to another compulsive thing, whether it's food or TV or internet, relationships, whatever it might be. Maybe you have ADHD and you're listening to this going, great, she's lost me at this point. There's several studies, one in particular from UCLA, that took people with ADHD and they did 8 weeks of very short mindfulness and meditation exercises. And at the end of those 8 weeks, their ability to focus had improved and their levels of depression and anxiety had reduced. So if you have something like ADHD, yes, directing your attention is a challenge. It's like being born with a muscle that's particularly weak. It doesn't mean that you can't make it stronger with practice. I think sometimes with so much rhetoric out there at the moment about ADHD, some people are feeling hopeless and going, well, I've got ADHD, so none of this stuff is possible for me. There are great content out there by ADHD content creators with all the life hack things about how to actually get yourself to do the thing. Because if you struggle with attention, particularly if you struggle with ADHD, you might be like, okay, well, yeah, if I could meditate, then that might improve things, but how do I get myself to do it? So you might need accountability. You might need to sign up for a short course. You might need to find a way to make it novel or track it or whatever it is that you need to help your ADHD brain. Be willing to give it a go. And the thing is, it will get easier and easier because even after 8 weeks, we're seeing a difference in focus. So hopefully when you're looking at your beliefs and your thoughts, you started to identify like, what does recovery look like? And then it's like, okay, where is it I need to be putting my attention to be practicing these thoughts? This direction of attention is crucial if you're somebody who thinks about food a lot. Now, firstly, if you are trying to restrict, you're going to think about food a lot. Your biology will do that, and none of this stuff is relevant until you have addressed that piece. But if you're not restricting, but you're just thinking about food a lot because this is part of your conditioned pattern, then being able to direct your attention when your mind starts obsessing and going, oh, I'm gonna go over here. I'll do this thing if I see a photograph of myself and maybe my mind gets drawn to something I see on that photograph and I have a critical thought about my body or my appearance or something. I push myself away from it. I'm not going down that route, because the more I focus on what I perceive to be flaws, the bigger they're going to become in my mind. It's like that with anything, whether you're focused on food, whether you're focused on something to do with your body. The things we focus on expand. And this is partly how body dysmorphia develops. Someone becomes very fixated on a flaw, and the more they look at it, the bigger that becomes in their brain, until their brain physically sees that flaw differently, perceived flaw, not a flaw, what it thinks is a flaw differently to how everybody else sees it. So with attention, practice, practice, practice. That can look like a meditation or mindfulness practice. It can be Googling somatic exercises and doing something that's much more in your body. It can be something like yoga. It can be just going for a walk without your headphones and just trying to really be in your environment. It doesn't have to be this formal breathwork meditation. Find something that works for you. But I can't emphasize enough how this is key to having mastery over maybe everything in your life, to be able to choose where you put your attention. And your wiring will follow suit to keep strengthening that, and then it becomes automatic and you don't even have to consider where you put your attention in that area. There'll be another problem that pops up somewhere else, because that just seems to be what happens. And the last piece, which kind of turbocharges this process of rewiring, it's about emotional reactivity. In the generation before me, the question would have been, where were you when you heard JFK was shot? For me, it was, where were you when Diana died? Or where were you when you heard about the Twin Towers attack? And when you ask these questions to people, people know where they were. Because when we hear something shocking, or we have an emotional response to something, particularly if it's out of the ordinary, our brain flags that as important. Oh, it's created this emotional response, that means it's important. We need to remember this. That's actually no advantage to me knowing where I was when I heard Princess Diana died, or when I heard about the Twin Towers. But it gives us an insight into the brain and how the brain works. So there's two aspects to this. The emotional reactions that keep happening within the old conditioning, keep reinforcing the old conditioning. Keep strengthening it, making it more active. Your brain thinks it's important, so it just keeps going into this old conditioning. Let's think about food all the time. Let's think about binging. Let's think about dieting, whatever it might be. So we get stuck. How we feel makes us stuck. So we need to reduce the emotional reactivity to this piece over here, the conditioned part. And then with the new conditioning, the new wiring that we want to build, we want to create some emotional energy around that in order to make this new wiring stronger. I think it's Amber Ray who talked about emotions as they're not personal, they're like the weather. They're these things that happen to us. What makes them bigger, or what makes them problematic, is often our reaction to them. So emotions tend to get layered. So it could be you feel jealous, and then you feel shame, you feel bad about yourself for being jealous. You think you must be this horrible person. So now not only are you dealing with this feeling of jealousy, but you're dealing with a layer of shame on top of it. Any self-judgment of emotions is like pouring petrol on top of it, or pouring gasoline on top of it. It just compounds it. Our initial emotional responses are mostly outside of our control. The bit where we want to come in and do something differently is in how we react to those emotional responses. Because for so many people, I see that their reaction is the very thing that's making these emotional responses worse for them. If you're like many people I meet, you may end up identifying yourself with your feelings. So you might say, I'm a jealous person, I'm an angry person. You might just say, I'm an emotional person, as opposed to, I'm just a person with emotions. We identify our emotions and we feel like they're part of who we are, instead of experiences that are happening to us. Being able to switch from one set of conditioning into building this new set of conditioning involves an identity shift. We end up identifying with the things we believe. We identify with the feelings we feel, instead of recognizing them as an experience and us as the experiencer. We also know that when you are overwhelmed in a high emotional state, whether it's stress, overwhelm, your limbic brain becomes very active. So therefore blood flow in the brain moves towards your limbic brain because that's where all the activity is. But what that means is many people experience what feels like a kind of shutting down of their executive functioning, the part that feels like them, the part that can think more clearly. And we can reduce emotional reactivity in a couple of ways, and they are curiosity and compassion. What curiosity does is it allows us to ask questions and to look at something in a different way. You will have beliefs about your binging, and I don't doubt that some of the beliefs in there are about what a undisciplined, weak, broken person that you are. What if that's not true? Like, what if you're just trapped in this conditioned vortex over here? When you disidentify yourself from the problem, you are now outside of it, able to look at it, able to be curious. But the minute you lose all curiosity and you think you know what it is, you then become the problem again. Like I mentioned in the first point, you will need to really think about this concept if it's going to make any sense to you, if it's going to be part of your recovery journey. Because you might be listening to it and it might feel a bit confusing, or you might be listening and you might be resonating. But it's like pulling out anything of what I'm saying that makes sense to you, assuming that you've stuck with me so far. Now let's move over to the recovery mindset, the new wiring that we want to build up. Isn't it so much easier if you are in that mode of losing weight and you're getting on the scale, and every time you get on the scale you get this emotional reward, which then keeps motivating you and you keep staying in it. And then it's one of the reasons why when those rewards stop coming, people end up springing back. It's one of the reasons why psychologically dieting is so hard, let alone the biological stuff. So whenever you spend time thinking in your recovered mind, anytime you are thinking, feeling, or behaving in a way that you want to reinforce as the recovered you need to show yourself some appreciation. It doesn't have to be big, dramatic, but taking a moment to really feel a sense of appreciation to yourself for doing that new thing, for having that moment where, oh gosh, in this moment I would normally have slipped into this, and instead I remembered this and I thought about it like this, and then I was able to just make a choice that felt right for me. These moments, what it is you want, you need to emotionally reinforce, because that gives the part of your brain that's building these new networks, it gives it a bit of juice. This video was actually inspired by somebody in my comments section who said that by watching my videos they felt like their brain was being rewired, which I thought was lovely. And there was also another comment not that long ago where somebody said, oh, your content's good, but I don't agree with everything you say. And my first thought was, good, they're thinking about it for themselves. And on that note, I want to let you know, this week I've launched my first course that starts in October, and it's called Your Intuitive Eating Blueprint. And the idea is we do all the principles in the first 3 weeks, and then we spend 5 weeks thinking about it, constantly being invited to think about it and make it yours. Because I think this is how we really cement these changes that we want to make. If you want to find out more about that course, I will pop the details below. But I just want to say I have a theory for people who see themselves as having low self-esteem and who don't like themselves very much at all. I don't think that they actually hate themselves. I think the part of themselves they don't like is this conditioned part. So if this is you, I don't think that you hate yourself or you're disappointed with yourself or any of this. I think that it's this conditioned part of you that you're struggling to like. And because it feels like who you are, you feel like you're just somebody that you just don't like being. But anyway, I'll leave you with that thought. Take care, and I'll see you on the next video.